Warning, 50 States, 50 Murders is a podcast based around true crime. Please be advised of the horrific details of murder, abuse, and sexual assault, occasional adult language, as well as brief humor. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Hello, and welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders. I am your host, AJ.
And I am your co-host, Sarah.
This is the podcast taking you, the listener, on an auditory road trip across all 50 states while we discuss 50 different murders. Thank you all for tuning in to Season 2, Episode 29.
Join us as we take a journey to the swamps of Louisiana as we dive into a tale of a father's revenge.
Welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders. Big thank you for everyone tuning back in. Apologies for last week's absence. That was a rookie mistake on my end. I'll take 100% blame for that one. We are in Louisiana this week. I'm excited about this one. This is my personal favorite murder case. So hopefully that's not too strange. But I am looking forward to diving into this one. I'll go ahead and say that this week's recommendation comes from me personally. Wanted to cover Louisiana on this fictional road trip for a couple different reasons. Like I said, first and foremost, my favorite murder case, but also I really enjoy the eeriness and the just the lore of the Bayou, and it's a state I've always wanted to see. And I think there's a lot of pop culture TV shows, movies that are focused in Louisiana, and it's just got like a creepy voodoo, Mardi Gras-esque vibe. So I'm excited to see if Louisiana falls under where you rank Louisiana at as we get to the end of it. But for me, I definitely have to say it's up there.
Yeah. So we covered Megan's Law in the state of New Jersey, which we followed up with the case of Breasia Terrell in Iowa. So as we jump into this week's episode in the state of Louisiana, let's go ahead and call this part 3 of a 3-part series.
So Louisiana, its state nickname is the Pelican State, and that's because the brown pelican is native to the Louisiana Gulf Coast and has been the state bird since 1966. Pelican is a state symbol to Louisiana, and the pelican was once on brink of extinction back in the mid-1900s, so Louisiana rallied to protect and reintroduce the pelicans, leading to a major comeback, which has reinforced the pelican as a symbol or resilience and recovery. So I like to think of like Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, the state of Louisiana. They really were on some hard times, and to this day they're still bouncing back and recovering. So they like to use the pelican as a state symbol for their resilience and recovery. Louisiana is located in the southern United States. As mentioned, they sit on the Gulf. The state that borders Texas, they're a state that borders Texas to the west, Mississippi to the east, Arkansas to the north. The southeast region is where Louisiana is located and was originally owned by the French. Thus, you have the French Quarter, the French cuisine, as well as the heavy French influences in the area. We talked about the Alaska Purchase, United States purchasing Alaska from Russia, and it was kind of viewed as like not a great purchase for the old U.S. of A. But this purchase, however, quite the opposite. So the French were looking to sell as Napoleon needed cash to fund his wars over in Europe. He had given up on building a French empire here in the Americas. So the Louisiana Purchase was made in 1803 for just $15 million. And again, same with Alaska. I just felt like $15 million, doesn't seem like a lot of money.
Not really.
With inflation, of course, this would be around $500 million today. Still, doesn't really seem like a ton of money for the amount of land that was purchased. The U.S. paid about 3 to 4 cents per acre, and even to this day is considered to be one of the best real estate deals of all time. How about some unusual laws? I'm sure that Louisiana's probably got some interesting laws that we may not be familiar with.
Absolutely. They're definitely no stranger to unusual laws. First up, we have no throwing of reptiles at parades.
Okay.
So it is illegal to throw reptiles at parade floats. This is an actual law to prevent people from throwing gators or snakes during festivals.
Yeah, I think that's a fair law. I'm not sure I want to be on a parade float and see a snake flying at my head.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate no one throwing a gator my way. So
I would be terrified. I think the snakes, honestly, probably would freak me out a little bit more, which maybe not. But I think to throw a gator, it'd have to be a small gator.
Got to be a baby.
And the snakes are just, those are one of my biggest fears. But it's funny, though, because this had to have actually happened.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure there
has to be a story behind the fact that this is an actual law. Absolutely.
Nonetheless, no throwing of reptiles at parades.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Next up, we have gator theft. So speaking of reptiles, it's a felony to steal an alligator in the state of Louisiana. Stealing or possessing a gator can result in a $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in prison.
Interesting. I feel like that's a pretty big punishment for stealing a gator.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, no stealing a gator. I don't know who would really want to steal a gator. Again, I'm probably sure there's a reason behind that law.
For sure. And last up, we have no broken promises. So it is illegal to promise to marry someone and then back out. This law stems from the old French influence where a broken promise can result in financial or emotional damages.
Okay, no broken promises. That could lead to some people I know particularly might do some time in jail. Okay.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you can not get engaged and not follow up with a marriage.
Hey, I mean, it is a commitment that you are to keep. So, okay, no broken promises. We have the Louisiana state flag. We've kind of been going back and forth on the flags. I like this one. We got a pretty cool flag this week.
Yeah, I like this one with the pelican and its babies.
Got a blue flag, a mama pelican, its babies, and just doing a quick reading on this one. So the mom is like taking off of its own breastplate to feed its babies. Mm-hmm. So it's like, again, just kind of goes back to that state symbol that they reflect on so heavily. Murder per capita. I know the last few states we've really been at the bottom of the list. 49, 50, 47. And this week, Louisiana comes in at number 1 of all 50 states for murder per capita. They are averaging 16.1 murders per 100,000 people. So not only are they the number 1 state, but there's actually some interesting stats to go along with Louisiana. Louisiana consistently has a high murder rate, with the state experiencing a higher murder rate and non-negligent manslaughter rate than any other U.S. state in 2023 for the 35th straight year. That's longer than I've been alive. Mm-hmm. Louisiana has consistently ranked high in homicide rates, finishing first or second every year the CDC has measured the statistic, dating back to 2014. And lastly, the U.S. average for murders per 100,000 was 6.6 from 1989 to 2014, while Louisiana averaged 13.7 murders per 100,000 people during that same period.
So more than double.
Yeah, so this one specific state in general doubles the entire U.S. average. So, if you're ever down in Louisiana and you're celebrating Mardi Gras or, you're watching some parades, watch for reptiles being thrown your way, and maybe just keep an idea of where you're at. It's probably going to be one of those states where you want to keep your head on a swivel. Depending on your location, murder is double here than the rest of the country. So that's some interesting tidbits about the state of Louisiana. And always, I like to throw in some top places to see when visiting. So what do we have for the first stop?
So first up, we have Mardi Gras. Okay. So Mardi Gras is known for its elaborate parades featuring floats, marching bands, and maskers throwing beads and other trinkets. New Orleans Mardi Gras parades are known as the greatest free show on earth because they are free to attend. Mardi Gras is French for Fat Tuesday. The season is known as Carnival, and it begins on the 12th night, January 6th, and extends until midnight before Ash Wednesday.
All right. I've never been in New Orleans, so obviously never been to Mardi Gras, but I think it'd be a pretty cool experience. I think going to New Orleans, going to Louisiana, it's definitely a must-see if you're ever in the state.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's something I would want to visit at some point in my life.
The masquerade, the French connections, the cuisine, just all of it. You have like the jazz music's pretty prevalent down there. I just think the culture down there is totally different than anything up here.
Yeah.
So I think that'd be cool. Next up, we have Oak Alley Plantation. From its beginnings over 200 years ago, Oak Alley was just a land claim on a map. Today, however, Oak Alley is a National Historic Landmark dedicated to preserving and interpreting the history its inhabitants left behind. With an emphasis on its time as a sugar plantation, visitors are invited to walk under its iconic alley, explore its exhibits, slavery at Oak Alley, the Big House, Sugarcane Theater, people of Oak Alley, and the blacksmith shop. This way you can leave with a better understanding of the plantation's complex history. And I think complex history is a really good way to put it. I mean, first and foremost, it's definitely got a tragic history. It's based off of slavery that the South experienced well before our time. But on top of all that tragic history, I mean, it is a beautiful landmark that, it is a National Historic Landmark. So if you're into history, which I know a lot of us are, it's a good place to check out and kind of get an idea, see what that time era was like. The trees itself, you have a huge driveway. I'm sure if you've seen a picture, we'll post on TikTok, you've probably seen what we're talking about. So I think all in all, regardless of its complex history, Oak Alley Plantation would be a pretty cool historic landmark to check out.
I agree. And last up, we have swamp tours. So Louisiana is known for its swamp tours. AJ, have you ever been on a swamp tour?
I have not. I would like to go on one someday, but I haven't had the opportunity to do so just yet. How about you? Have you been on one?
I have. We visited some in Florida before.
Okay.
I think I've at least went on a couple. I know one was like more of a smaller boat. I shouldn't say small boat, but like a smaller tour where it was more just like us and another family. And, just getting to see the gators up really, really close was kind of cool.
Okay, so we're talking about like the airboats. You got the big fan in the back. Okay, yeah, I think that'd be cool for sure.
Yeah, and then some are like the much larger ones that, like the duck, the big duck.
Yeah, yeah.
That goes into the water and stuff like that. So those are always interesting to me because you actually are right, up front and center. And the guides there always seem to have a lot of information, which is really cool to learn about.
Yeah, so for the swamp tours, nowhere specifically here in Louisiana, just anywhere you can find a swamp tour. I think you're going to get a pretty cool experience when you're down in the swamps. That's what Louisiana is most famous for. And, the whole state, they are recognized as being below sea level. Mm-hmm. And I think that is probably the biggest reason why Hurricane Katrina was so devastating. So when you go down there, it's literally like the whole state is just swampland. So you don't have to look very far for those swamp tours. They're pretty much everywhere. But yeah, I would like to go out there, see the alligators, get on the airboat. I think that'd be a really cool experience.
Yeah.
So now that we've learned a little bit more about the state of Louisiana, we've learned about some places to see while you're down there, let's dive into some infamous Louisiana murderers before we dive into our own murder case this week.
First up, we have Derek Todd Lee. And I do appreciate AJ for finding some names that are a little bit easier to pronounce this time around.
Yeah, it doesn't get a whole lot easier than Derek Todd Lee. It's
Derek
a little
Todd Lee.
Nice switch up from the usual hard-to-pronounce murderers we get.
For sure. He's also known as the Baton Rouge serial killer. So Derek Todd Lee was an active serial killer in the state from 1992 to 2003. He was believed to have killed at least 7 women. Lee targeted women around Baton Rouge. He was charming and manipulative. He would gain his victims' trust before killing them. DNA was eventually able to link him to the murders. Derek Todd Lee was arrested in 2003 and died in prison in 2016.
All right, so there we go. First up, Derek Todd Lee. We have the Baton Rouge serial killer. Who do we got next?
Go
ahead.
Sorry, just for the picture-wise, I know sometimes we talk. Doesn't he look so shocked?
Yeah, my guy's looking real surprised. Like, me?
Yeah, so we'll definitely throw that up on the TikTok whenever I get a little caught up. But
he looked like he was expecting a not guilty verdict.
Yeah, if I would have made a like a little meme out of him, it would say, "Who, me?"
Yeah. Oh shit. All right.
7 women. Next up, we have Ronald Dominique, the Bayou Strangler. Is it Bayou or Bayou?
I feel like you could go either way.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Bayou Strangler.
I like that.
Ronald committed his murders between the years of 1997 and 2006. He had confessed to killing 23 men. He targeted men who were homeless or struggling. He was able to lure these men in with promises of money or drugs. When alone, he would then rape and murder them. Ronald was sentenced to life in prison without parole in 2008.
All right. Opposite. He's not looking very surprised. Think he was dead to rights. So.
Almost a decade of murdering all those people, though. That is crazy.
A long time to... I don't know. I'm not a murderer myself. I'm assuming it's just one of those things where maybe it's like a vice and you just can't stop because it's like, man, that's a long time to just keep getting away with it. You would think at some point, like, you would count your blessings that you got away with it, but you just keep going until you get caught. And he does not look surprised whatsoever.
Nope.
All right, so we have one more case here for Louisiana infamous murders. This one was a pretty famous case in American history. What do we got for our last one up here?
So last up, we actually have our first female serial killer.
All right.
So our last infamous killer from the state of Louisiana gained her fame by being the only woman executed by electrical chair in the state. Back in 1940, she murdered a man while attempting to break her husband out of jail. The case drew national attention, giving her attractive looks, charisma, and tragic past. She was executed in 1942 at the age of 26. To this day, the case of Tony Joe Henry remains a very haunting topic in the haunting past of Louisiana history.
All right, Tony Joe Henry. So we have a woman here who was just basically a ride or die. She was going to break her man out of prison. I would assume that with that, she killed someone. I'm assuming that she must have killed a guard, a jail worker of some sort, thus being executed. But, she basically blew up because she was attractive. And I think we see that today with TikTok, social media. You'll have people who are arrested and their mugshot blows up, and next thing you know, they're famous. So this is probably one of the first times that has ever happened. Her mugshot's in the newspaper, everyone thinks she's attractive, and the next thing you know, she's blowing up.
Yeah.
This week, as we are in the Pelican State of Louisiana, we will be discussing my personal favorite murder case. Now, as Sarah mentioned at the top of our show, this is also going to close out our 3-part series going back to the 2 episodes prior to this case. This week, we are going to discuss a father's love and a desire for taking revenge into his own hands. Our last 2 cases featured tragic tales of children being murdered. In these cases, you could argue that their parents may or may not have looked the other way, turned a blind eye, or done wrong by those who were responsible, or done wrong by those whose responsibility it was to protect them. You had a child taken too soon by their next-door neighbor, and the other by their stepfather. While this week's case is tragic in its own way, you can close out this 3-part series with a very fitting and proper ending. So every week, I try to find a topic point, a question, something to take from each case. And my question this week, it's clear, simple, short, and sweet. It's not a loaded or complex question. Honestly, it's blunt and just straight to the point. Now, getting to this, there was a video not too long ago that went viral on social media. The video was discussed was just asking mothers, basically, would you kill for your child? Have you Have you seen this? Are you familiar with it?
I have, yeah. I remember seeing a little clip. I don't know if I've seen the whole thing, but I've definitely seen pieces and parts, I think maybe on TikTok.
Okay, so I have a little bit of the clip here. If you're not familiar, just check this out.
Would you kill for your kid? Would I kill for my kid?
Yeah.
Oh. Kill somebody?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Would you kill for your child to protect them?
Oh, hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely.
No. Maybe? Is that an answer? Maybe.
I'm willing to do whatever it takes as long as it's legal.
I mean, it takes a lot. Like, that's a big thing to do.
I'm not just gonna go out and randomly kill people.
Definitely.
Yeah, of course.
Wouldn't think twice.
Absolutely.
Why is that so easy to answer?
Because, like, if I don't, who will?
I almost died having them, so I'll kill for them.
It's like mom to the rescue. Double up the cape because we already wear one.
Would you kill for your child?
No. No.
I don't think I would kill for my children, but I do think I would be mouthy enough that somebody might murder me standing up for my children.
You don't think these things through when you do them, right?
Okay, so that's just a little tidbit. Obviously, they're picking and piecing together their favorite, most controversial responses. But all in all, the question is, would you kill for your child? And I thought those responses were pretty interesting. Obviously, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. And, I mean, first, right off rip, I mean, Sarah, I'll throw it to you. I mean, do you feel like you would kill for your child?
I do. Yeah, without a question. I do think that video is a little bit misleading. I know some of the questions, like if you hear the first question was, would you kill for your child?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people were kind of hesitant. But then in the second round, the male asked other people, would you kill for your child to protect them? And I do think there's a little bit of a difference between those two questions. I mean,
sure.
Would I kill for my child? My first instinct is always going to be yes.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to protecting them, my answer would always be hell yes, without
Sure.
a question, without a doubt. If I needed to murder somebody to protect my child, I would do so.
Yeah, and I would have to say that that's probably the, hopefully the majority response. I mean, I would like to think that if my mom was asked that same question 30 years ago, I'd hope that that would be her response. But not everyone necessarily feels that way. But again, this is going to be my favorite murder case of the week. And we'll find out a little bit why, because we get a pretty hammered in answer to that question. Would you kill for your child? So over the last two episodes, it would be easy to question the parents' decisions that were made regarding the welfare of their children, whether it was by accident, mistake, New Jersey, Megan's Law. You had maybe not necessarily a lot of parental supervision. Mom was taking a nap, dad was kind of just chilling, but nonetheless, you had the sibling supervision and
Neighbors.
Unfortunately, she was kidnapped by her neighbor. And then our case in Iowa, where the stepfather killed his stepdaughter, and the mother was, we kind of debated some things in that case, whether it was right or wrong, as well as the stepfather's girlfriend. I think we kind of both agreed that there was definitely some responsibility in there.
Absolutely.
So, and also that doesn't necessarily mean that this week's case, the parents were 100% innocent in what took place. But nonetheless, would you kill for your child? And our father for the week most certainly would.
This week's case will take us back to 1984. We will be talking about Gary Plauche, the Plauche family, and more so Gary's son Jody, and of course the murder case surrounding these two. Gary Plauche was born November 10th, 1945, making him 38 at the time of our case. He was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Gary was a sergeant in the Air Force, and after serving for his country, he made his living as a heavy equipment salesman. Gary was married to June Sheridan and later divorced. Together, they had 4 children: Gary Jr., Jody, Jeffrey, and Jennifer. Gary was a hardworking man who traveled year-round to give his middle-class family the best life possible. Not only was Gary a hardworking family man, a husband, An Air Force veteran, he was also a murderer.
Dun, dun, dun. A murderer. Okay.
Murderer.
So we got Gary and his family full of lots of J's. Wife June, Gary Jr., Jody, Jeffrey, and Jennifer. There's a lot of J's.
I'm guessing they called Gary Jr. just Junior.
Probably, yeah.
So it was all J's.
Makes most sense, for sure. So like most parents, they encourage their children to be active and involved. Now, I remember going back to when I was a child. Honestly, my mom pretty much made it a requirement that I had to be involved in something. It didn't matter what it was. Soccer, basketball, baseball. It just had to be something. I wasn't allowed to sit at home and do absolutely nothing. So, as we all know from past discussions, I am not a parent myself, but I think getting your children involved and being part of a group, it's huge. For me, it led to friendships, bonds, experiences, and all in all, I just feel like being active, it keeps you out of trouble, and I think it's a good move. So for you, someone who was a child growing up, first and foremost, were you involved in any clubs or sports growing up?
Yeah, so me and my sister tried about every type of dance.
Okay.
So tap dance, jazz, every dance you can think of, ballet. We were a part of all of those as a younger kid, probably I would say around 5, 6, 7, 8.
Okay.
And from as long as I can remember, we were also part of, t-ball and then softball. We played for the high school. We played for several travel ball teams. Our parents were super active in that. My dad was our coach, one of our coaches for our travel ball team. So, and it's a lot of your schedule. We did a ton of traveling, and that requires a lot of practices, a lot of weekends, a lot of training. So,
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we both come from two households where being involved was certainly encouraged. Now, I know your daughter's still maybe a little bit too young necessarily to get involved into team sports per se, but as she gets older, I mean, do you think that's something you're going to push for as well?
I've tried. Definitely. I would love for her to be a part of softball like I was at this time. And she's only 5.5. So, I'm going to give her a little bit of time. I know a lot of parents rush their kids into either t-ball or soccer. I know soccer's a huge one, but
soccer seems to be the go-to.
Yeah, it seems to be the go-to. And I just remember sitting in a lot of my niece's games, and a lot of them just look like they're not even having fun. They're just
sitting
running
on the ground.
sitting around, or just running around in either way. They have no idea where they're actually going. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting to me. So as of now, Emmy is only involved in Girl Scouts. So I'm involved as a helping hand there. And, we meet like twice a month, and we try to do one activity a month, which I think is a little bit more manageable when you have a 5-year-old going to school and 2 parents who are working a lot with a very unpredictable schedule.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And being involved doesn't necessarily mean a sport. I mean, it could be Girl Scouts, it could be choir, jazz band, instruments, anything like that. Just get involved in general and being part of something. I think it's important for your development. Yeah. And for the Plauches, they encouraged and did all they could for their kids to enjoy and succeed in the clubs that they chose. Now, for their son Jody, who we're going to be focusing on, he wanted to pursue martial arts as his sport of choice.
Jody's parents backed him 100% in his interest in karate and mixed martial arts. There just so happened to be a local studio close to their home in Baton Rouge, which he was encouraged to try out. Not only did Jody give the karate studio a chance, he was developing a real talent for the sport, under the leadership of studio instructor Jeffrey Doucette. I think this goes for a lot of sports, especially as you grow up and develop. There's a true bond between player and coach.
Yeah, and with MMA especially, I mean, I obviously, you look at me, I was never someone who was in MMA personally, but I do love watching UFC, and I almost feel like UFC, MMA, more so than any other sport, the bond you have with your coach, you could say it's for boxing too, the person that's in your corner. I mean, you're in a sport where it's probably the closest thing to life or death. I mean, you are trying to knock someone else out unconscious. So that person that you have in your corner that is training you and responsible for your well-being, I mean, they have the opportunity to throw in the towel if things aren't going well. Obviously, that's at an older age. Jody was just a younger kid, but that bond that you develop with your trainer, more so in any other sport. I mean, that's a huge relationship.
Yeah. MMA, it's a lot like a student-teacher relationship, if
Definitely.
you would say.
100%.
The family viewed Jeffrey as a positive role model for their son, which was also very important to them. With Jody's passion of the sport continuing to grow, along with his skill set, the family as a whole built a relationship with the instructor. They would have Jeffrey over for dinner, and on some occasions, he would even stay overnight. So you may have some red flags raising immediately, especially after our last couple cases, but this is telling for how much the family trusted and respected Jeffrey. Gary had a bit of soft spot for his son's instructor and felt bad for his living situation. Many of the time, Jeffrey lived out of the studio and didn't have his own place to call home. Thus, out of appreciation, as well as probably a little bit of pity, he allowed him to stay overnight on a couple occasions.
Yeah, I think going back to our last few episodes and regarding harm to children, yeah, I could see that it's pretty easy naturally to allow a stranger to spend the night in a home where your kids live at. But on the flip side of things, keeping in mind, again, that close bond that you have to have. And
to them, he wasn't really a stranger.
They viewed this person as a member of their family, which I think more so even goes to show how much more that this bond really was. I mean, he was not a stranger. He was part of the family. And listening to documentaries about Gary, you mentioned at the top he was in the military. He travels for his family. He just sounds like a good guy in general. He means well. So I think he sees this person who's taking time out of his day to help his son, who doesn't have a home. So in return, it's almost like he's helping him a little bit. You help me, I help you. Here's a place to stay at night. So red flags, naturally, I think that's fair. But when you really break it down, to them, to the Plauches, not that weird. Now, with that being said, we're going to get a little bit more of a red flag coming here. So our story, it's going to fast forward to Valentine's Day of 1984. That's February 14th. Jeffrey Doucette, who was the well-respected mentor to Jody, but also was looked upon with a little bit of pity due to his living situation. Well, things were starting to look up for Jeffrey, and he finally got his own place. Now, naturally, he's proud of his own home. He got some furniture, some furnishings, and he wanted to show it off a little bit. Not weird. I think that's pretty normal to want to show off to your family. But what was weird to me is he invited just Jody, his student, to come over. Not the whole family, not the Plauches. He just wanted Jody to come over to see the new house and new furniture. So I think naturally we have some bells going off in our head. First, he's staying the night with the family. Now he wants his student to come over, just him, and check out his new furniture. Now, for me, when I was that age, I really didn't care about furniture. It didn't really do anything for me personally, but maybe Jody had an interest in furniture. Who knows?
I don't know. I think that part is very odd.
Yeah, if I'm the mom or the dad, like, oh yeah, I'll bring him over, and I'm going to be joining him. For sure.
We will all come see your new furniture.
Yeah.
We'll bring over some dinner, a little housewarming gift maybe.
Yeah, we're happy for you. You know, you stay at our house. We'll come check out your house for sure.
And having kids, that small, I also think like if Jeffrey had kids of his own, it might have made it seem a little bit less awkward.
Yeah.
Like
A play date.
Hey, come over, but so the kids can play. But it wasn't like that, so I do find that a little bit interesting.
Yeah, a little bit interesting, but keep it in mind, again, the Plauche family, they had great respect for their son's instructor. They appreciated all the lessons and training he provided to their son. So at this point, they still felt like no harm, no foul thus far. Mm-hmm. This was a person they trusted with their child, someone who not only was allowed to stay the night, someone who they were not only allowing their son to visit at his new home, but also keep in mind, you kind of touched on this a little bit with the softball. Also with karate, there's out-of-town trips, out-of-state trips. You're going on, for softball, there's team trips. For mixed martial arts, you're going on all these different out-of-town tournaments. And for Jody, he would go with his coach, Jeffrey. So for the Plauches, going over to his house, being a trusting family, it didn't seem that odd. Now, for you with the out-of-state trips, I mean, how did that work for you? Because I never had the opportunity to do out-of-state trips, so what was that about?
It's a little bit different for me because, like I said, my dad was one of our travel ball coaches.
Did other people's
so he had to be
parents
there.
go as well? Or?
Other people, I would probably say it was probably about 50-50.
Okay.
So other children did go without their parents, but I feel like it was kind of like a carpool situation. Like,
yeah.
They all necessarily didn't go under like my dad or the assistant coach's guidance. They kind of went under somebody else that they maybe were friends with. On the team. Yeah,
reading this, I thought like the one-on-one out-of-state trips again, just kind of weird. But you keep in mind the trust and respect that they had, and things were different back then. And I didn't get to experience the, I was never quite athletic enough to get those out-of-state trips. So,
well, it's hard for me to say too because I'm trying to think back. I feel like all of my travel ball coaches had children.
Sure, yeah.
In around the age that they were coaching, because I know a lot of our dads kind of moved up with us. Like they moved from 10 under to 12 under to 14 under, and on with us. So that it's a little bit hard for me to say, but
sure. Okay, so yeah, that is more so just to kind of continue to give you, the listener, an idea into where the Plauches felt about Jeffrey Doucette and the trust that they had towards him. So, again, staying the night, letting their kid go over to his house might not have been that odd, but unfortunately, Valentine's Day of 1984, it was more than just a trip.
While Jeffrey was a sufficient martial arts trainer, sadly for Jody, he was also a predator and a child molester. For months, in between training, he was grooming and sexually assaulting Jody, who was just 11 years old at the time. This abuse initially took place at the studio and later on during out-of-town trips. The abuse would take place in motels they were staying at. It eventually got to a point where the abuse became a daily occurrence. Jody was too afraid to notify his parents of the pain and anguish she was going through. Meanwhile, the family had no idea of any wrongdoing taking place behind closed doors.
All right, so to kind of put this on pause for a moment here, when you're on Netflix documentaries or news stories and such, I think it's easy to question, how could this happen? Why wouldn't the kid immediately speak up and say something? But you keep in mind, he was 10, 11 years old at the time. And even just watching like Law and Order Special Victims Unit, you see all these cases where, if you tell your parents, I'll kill them, you can't tell anyone, This is our secret. And when you're that young, you don't want anything to happen to your family. You almost feel responsible now for their safety. Like if I say anything, my mom and dad could be hurt. So I just think that has to more likely be what happened. He probably threatened him to keep this a secret. Thus, the Plauches, they're thinking like, oh, this guy's so great. He's really taking care of our kid. Meanwhile, complete opposite.
Yeah.
He's doing all these monstrous things in the studio, in the motel, and they got him spending the night at the house. And, not necessarily a fault to the Plauches, but this was, I know we've mentioned before, like background checks being so important. I mean, this was in the 80s, before the internet. I'm not sure how easy it was initially to get a background check back in the day.
I don't either. I know that's why it's really hard to say, but that's why going forward, I do think every parent who they allow to stay at their house should always be vetted out, even if it's somebody that you think that very well.
Yeah.
Or that's respected in the community. I think at 11 years old, Jody was easily groomed.
Definitely.
So I think that even if Jeffrey didn't necessarily threaten him or threaten his life, he's looking at this guy as a mentor, as somebody, as a father figure, as somebody he trusts. His father is traveling for work and stuff and maybe not as around as much.
Yep.
And I think that Jeffrey kind of put into his brain that this is a normal kind of relationship that two people have. And I think probably as an 11-year-old growing up, 11-year-old boy, which I can't say because I've never been,
right,
but I would have to think that he had a lot of shame and guilt.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
With what was taking place.
So we're going to jump back to Valentine's Day of 1984 and Jody's visit to Jeffrey's home. What was initially believed to just be a trip to see the new home, the newly acquired furnishings, it was sadly far beyond that. This day initiated a kidnapping where Jeffrey would abduct Jody and take him across multiple state lines. Together they ended up in Anaheim, California, where Jeffrey would get a hotel and the abuse would continue. Back home in Baton Rouge, after Jody never came home, no signs or communication from their son, they panicked, searching everywhere for their son, and they then went to authorities to file a missing persons case.
Jody was held in Anaheim for 10 days, when in between the traumatic experiences at the hotel, they did visit places like Disneyland and the Hollywood sign.
Okay, cool. So, hey, in between the tragic abuse and all that stuff, hey, you're still getting a trip to Disneyland.
That's also where they're grooming.
We're going to go see the Hollywood sign. So, you know, this guy's probably
He's treating
thinking
it like a normal father-son trip, which is anything but. Jeffrey would tell those in the area that they were father and son. Jody wanted to go home, or at least he wanted to call home to his parents, but Jeffrey did not allow him to do so. However, after running low on funds, Jeffrey allowed Jody to make a collect call back to Louisiana. Given that back home the FBI had now been working the case, they were able to track this back to the Samoa Hotel out in Anaheim, California. Within minutes of hanging up, the police broke into the hotel to rescue Jeffrey and arrest Jeffrey for the kidnapping of the 10-year-old boy.
A day after the rescue, Jody was returned back home in Louisiana. The Plauches, heartbroken to have learned the kind of man Doucette really was. Broken to know the man they trusted with their son was doing the absolute worst things imaginable. Yet they were beyond thankful to have their son back home safe and sound in their care, as well as happy to know that their predator, the man they once respected and trusted, had been captured and arrested. So we go back to the part ones and part twos. Megan and Breasia, unfortunately, they were murdered. Now, in this case, as sad as it is, as tragic as it was, Jody is home safe. He was not murdered. They were able to save him and rescue him before it got to that point. And as mentioned, Jeffrey Doucette was arrested and processed by the Orange County Police Department in California. Now, before Jody was flown home, the medical staff in California performed a rape kit, confirming sexual abuse. Thus, it was decided that Jeffrey would also be flown back home to Louisiana at a later date for trial of kidnapping as well as sexual abuse to a minor.
So while they were happy to have their son back, as expected, there were certainly some side effects from this fearful experience. His physical appearance shifted, and his hair was dyed black to prevent anyone from possibly spotting him while away.
That part, just alone, I thought stood out to me quite a bit.
Yeah.
Obviously,
difficult.
The mental torment and thus, but to the fear of losing your child and then finally seeing them, and then he's got a completely different hair color.
Yeah.
I just feel like that'd be crazy to see.
Mm-hmm. Jody at first was adamant that his parents were aware of him leaving with Jeffrey, stating that they knew where he was the whole time. Also want to insert probably a piece of grooming.
Absolutely.
Jody denied any abuse at first when asked about it. He claimed there was no molestation of any sorts. He was completely different, though. Absence in his eyes, and you can tell he was shaken and shook. The fear he had for his abuser in return resulted in somewhat protecting him to avoid even worse repercussions from him getting in trouble for his actions.
Now, for Jody's parents, you can only imagine just the absolute anger in the hearts they felt towards the man who had broken their little boy. The sadness for what experiences he had to go through, and the experiences they had no idea of what was happening. But not only anger, not only sadness, but what came to my head, I couldn't imagine the guilt that Gary and his mother felt for allowing him to stay the night, for letting him to go out of town, just for even locating the martial arts studio in the first place. Not that that's necessarily their fault, because it's not, but, just the fact that they put their son in that situation, rightfully, wrongfully so, I can't imagine the guilt that they felt. So, they certainly took a whole lot of guilt to heart, which in return only added to the rage that was felt. This was a rage that, by definition, genuinely drove Gary crazy. There was a local news station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, WBRZ-TV, who reached out to the family to interview the Plauches amongst Jody's return home. During the interview, while appearing calm and collected, Gary had mentioned that he was aware of the sexual assault charges towards his son, and he expressed a helplessness, and that he honestly did not know how to handle the situation at hand. This was a man who loved his family and was grateful to have them whole again.
So we have a man, Gary, who was a sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, a hardworking man who traveled tirelessly, working as an on-the-road salesman to provide a living for his family. A man who undoubtedly loved his children and wanted to give them the best that he could. In return, this man, Jeffrey Doucette, that he respected, trusted, and even appreciated for the help he provided to his son in training. Not only was his trust and respect broken, but when you factor in the pity that he felt for this man and the help he wanted to give him with allowing him to stay in his own home at times, to know that not only did the person you trusted did the worst to your loved one, but to also factor in his own accountability for unknowingly allow and essentially put that relationship into motion by taking their son to that local martial arts studio. Not only the guilt, the fury, the rage, the pressure to make this right, and the anxiety of having no idea how to do that turned this family man into a ticking time bomb that was waiting to explode.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly summed up. I mean, I'm not even going to put you in his position specifically, but I think it's just easy to imagine having a child who was, all these things happen. And just, the anxiousness of how, because honestly, you really can't. You can't fix it. You can't change things. But I think as a parent, it's natural to think, like, how can I make this right? So
how can I protect my child?
Yeah, that has to drive a man absolutely crazy. So I get it. I understand. Absolutely. So here's where things get a little interesting. That same news station that interviewed the family, WBRZ-TV, Gary actually had a connection to the station and was drinking buddies with several of the executives on the inside. Not only was he close to the executives at the news station, but he also happened to be friends with several of the Baton Rouge Police Department employees. And it is believed that Gary's connections to both WBRZ-TV as well as the police department, this led to some information being leaked to Gary that should probably not have been. Information that a father of a child who was abused probably shouldn't know about their abuser, or maybe they should.
We had mentioned that while Jeffrey was arrested and captured in the state of California, it was best that he would be transported back to his home state of Louisiana for trial and punishment. Those on the inside landed details of Jeffrey's transfer back home. The flight he would be taking home, the date of the transfer, the time of the flight would be touching down, and the airport he would be arriving at. These were details that were meant to be private to protect the alleged perp. However, these are the exact details that were leaked to Gary Plauche, the father of his victim, the family man who was full of rage, guilt, and helplessness.
Yeah, so, in America, for better or worse, it's at least it used to be innocent till proven guilty. So when you have the transport of an alleged, sex offender, and, if it's my child, they come to me and they say, AJ, just wanted to let you know, this guy that did this thing to your son, he's going to be landing at Cleveland Hopkins Airport at 11:59 a.m. through Delta. I could promise you that at 11 o'clock on the dot, I'm going to be there exactly where this person's supposed to come through. So you can see why those details probably should not have been leaked to the father himself. So during the initial interview, he stated he felt helpless. He didn't know what to do to make this right. But with these leaked details of his son's abuser's arrival, he figured that it was time to start drawing up plans to do his best to figure out how to make it all better. So we're going to fast forward the story 2 weeks since the arrest. The date is March 16th, 1984. Jeffrey was flying back to Louisiana to face the music. Now, it's worth noting that on the flight home, he did confess to the crimes to the detectives who were transporting him under his own consent. So they didn't force a confession out of him. He was willingly giving this confession to the police. Not only did detectives capture their guy, but they had his confession, making this case seemingly an open and shut case. However, that was not necessarily the case, and Jeffrey Doucette would not face a single day in prison for the crime he committed.
The flight itself took off and landed at Baton Rouge Metro Airport without any issues around 9 p.m. The abuser in this heinous crime was under police custody, and the detectives had their confession while in flight. As they got off the flight, police escorted Jeffrey handcuffed through the airport, where they plan on taking him back to jail and bracing for trial. However, Gary Plauche was informed of all these arrival details, and his plan was already in motion. Through the airport terminal, in the arrival section awaited WBRZ on standby to document his transport back to Louisiana. Who the police did not know would be there was Gary. All of this creating a megastorm of epic proportions to be caught all on camera.
In the same area that Jeffrey would be walking through handcuffed, the same area that the local news cameras were on standby to catch him on camera, walking through in police custody, there also happened to be a wall of payphones. So that kind of just takes you back to how long ago this was. At the payphones was a man in a polo shirt, glasses, and hat. This man, who was in an interesting outfit, turned out to actually be Gary Plauche dressed in disguise. Detectives who were transporting the suspect were not aware Gary would be on site, so they were walking by with him close by pretty casually. At the time, Gary was using one of the payphones on the wall, having a conversation with his best friend. As Jeffrey got closer, Gary gave his best friend a warning. "Here he comes. You're going to hear a shot." Continuing the walk, it got to where Jeffrey was right next to the then disguised Gary, and they were well within arm's reach. You can see Gary turn around, which is where he shoots his son's abuser in the head point-blank range. He then turns back around to hang up the call. Jeffrey collapsed straight to the ground, and detectives rushed to secure Gary, getting his pistol out of his possession. The news channel was able to capture all of this on camera, as well as the detectives infamously yelling out the famous line, "Why, Gary? Why?" The question itself kind of sounds self-explanatory. Why would you do this? I mean, it's because he hurt his child. However, detectives were hurt in the moment because of their connection to the case. And they wanted to make sure they took Jeffrey down to ensure that he spent the rest of his life in prison. They had his confession, so his sentencing was a sure thing. They were also distraught that the fact that this family man that they had a connection to, they now were going to have to arrest for murder.
For the detectives, however, that's exactly what they had to do. They arrested Gary for the murder of Jeffrey Doucette. He was held in prison while he awaited his own trial. The live broadcast stunned viewers. However, it led to a huge wave of support for the father and a ton of public attention to the murder case. Given that he did shoot a defenseless handcuffed man at point-blank range on live TV, it would be tricky to argue the case. As for Jeffrey, after being shot point-blank range in the airport, he collapsed and went into a coma and was then placed on life support. The medical team was able to keep him on support long enough to harvest his healthy organs, and then they took him off life support and he passed away the very next day.
Okay, so yeah, right off the rip, I think it's a human instinct to say, "Oh, why would he be arrested?" Well, keep in mind, it's still
There's
another
still a system in place.
Still a human. He's got his hands handcuffed behind his back, and he did murder him on live TV. So, I mean, the system's in place so that we don't go out there and do these kind of things on our own. Not to say that it's not respectable. Not to say that you don't understand it. But yeah, the police detectives, you take a case over and you become so drawn into the family that you're trying to help, and they had a close bond, and as mentioned, he had already a bond with the detectives at the police station. So they didn't want to arrest this guy. You know, they wanted to help him, and nonetheless, that's pretty much what they had to do. As you mentioned, Jeffrey was in a coma. They were able to harvest those organs and, I guess give back to those who needed the organs. And after that, they took him off life support the next day. I can't imagine too many people were upset about that. Gary was originally charged with second-degree murder. Keep in mind all that rage and anger of this case that led Gary to go crazy. Well, that was literally what happened, and psychologists who were called upon to help with this case confirmed just that. Gary's defense team claimed temporary insanity. The reports that were conducted on Gary confirmed that he lost the understanding of right and wrong, leading to the murder of Jeffrey Doucette. The judge proceeding over this case, Judge Frank Saya, decided that sending Gary to prison would do no good to anyone and that there was no risk of him murdering again. Gary accepted a plea bargain, which he pleaded no contest to manslaughter. He was given 7 years of suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service, which was completed in 1989. Many years later, while being interviewed, he was asked if he regretted murdering his son's abuser. His reply was simple: hell no. Sadly, Gary passed away in 2014 at the age of 68 after suffering a stroke.
His son Jody grew up and wrote the book Why Gary Why, which was his own account of the story. In the book, it is revealed that at first he was upset with his father for viewing this man as a friend, but later he came to terms with him. He went on to attend Louisiana State University where he became a sexual abuse awareness activist, and he served on the executive board of Men Against Violence. He worked as a sexual assault counselor, and as recently as 2024, Jody gave an interview in which he said he was happy with his life and viewed his father, Gary Plauche, as, quote, the greatest dad of all time.
All right, and that's honestly, like I said, tragic story nonetheless, but that's why I really like to wrap up and use this story as part 3 of our 3-part series. You had these tragic stories that were harmful to children, and then whether you can question parents' decisions or not, you're not in their shoes. It's hard to say what you would do in certain situations. But what I will say is I just love the fact that not only did Gary take justice into his own hands, but when asked if he regretted it, hell no. He would do it again a million times if he could. And then I also thought that, as you were saying, his son grew up and he had a lot of resentment towards his father at first. I think we can all relate to that. We've all resented our parents in some shape or form. Maybe we just didn't understand the things that were done. We were younger. You grow up and you can
become
kind of
adults
understand.
yourself.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
You kind of go through some of the same experiences and you have a different viewpoint.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to get lost in the fact that our parents were also kids once. They were also living their life for the first time. And obviously, this guy that sexually assaulted you, he was allowed to stay the night. Yeah, that's terrible. And I'm sure that took a lot of therapy to forgive your father for. But it does make me happy to know that he was able to do so, and even to go as far as saying that greatest dad of all time. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was pretty unique. And I guess in closing of this last episode for our part 3, again, Megan's Law in New Jersey, the murder of Breasia Terrell in the state of Iowa. Now we have the abuse of Jody in the state of Louisiana. No one's perfect. No one's pointing fingers or placing blame. I mean, like we literally just said, everyone's living life for the first time, and every situation is unique. Absolutely. So, while the parents of this case might not be 1,000% innocent, I do appreciate the fact that it ends with a father's love, as well as the need for revenge, which I think we can all relate to. And rather than seeing his son's abuser spend life in a 6-by-foot cell, he's going to spend the rest of his life 6 feet underground. Regardless how you feel about violence, the intricacies, the rights and wrongs, it's hard not to respect that when going back to this week's question, would you kill for your child? Gary's answer to that question was undoubtedly absolutely, which thus making this case my personal favorite murder case. All right, so that's kind of my closing point. Anything else you want to throw in there before we recap the state of Louisiana?
I do really appreciate Gary saving his son from the trial and knowing that his abuser is still in jail and could be later on, let free and given the opportunity to do this to somebody else.
Yeah.
I think it definitely boils down with all three cases. I think given in today's world in 2025, which I know we've covered a lot of cases from very previous years. However, I think going forward in 2025 as parents, we all need to double, triple check who we allow around our children, who we allow to stay the night, who we allow in our own home, and protect our children and any other children that you are come into contact with or that are in your family or in your friend circle. You protect them as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think you mentioned something that I didn't even think about, and that's the fact that, Gary taking matters in his own hands. It prevents your child from having to go through the trial and having to look his abuser in the eyes. And I've never been in that situation. I could see how in some cases that's like empowering, but I can see how in a lot of cases it just brings it all back and makes it twice as bad. So, he didn't have to worry about that. He didn't have to deal with that. And, just be
Which
vigilant.
is the question of, would you kill for your child to protect them from having to suffer further abuse from their abuser?
Yeah. I think it's a fair question, and the answer undoubtedly for this one was yes. And I'm not a parent myself, but I definitely appreciate it, and I would like to think that in the same situation, I would undoubtedly do the same thing. Absolutely. So that wraps up our 3-part series. We're going to go ahead and move past murder cases involving children now that we got through that. We're going to go back to the good old-fashioned murder to adults. And I'm really excited about next week's episode. We'll be traveling to, you know what, I won't even say it. We'll just wait till next week. But I'm excited about it nonetheless. But before we wrap up, as always, I want to kind of recap the state we were in and get your take on it. So we recapped Louisiana, some things to do, some places to see, some pretty interesting laws. Can't be throwing snakes, can't be throwing alligators. Definitely don't steal an alligator. Make sure you check out Mardi Gras, all that good stuff. So I'll throw it back to you. I'll see if you have any more input on the state of Louisiana. And lastly, where would you rank it, 1 through 50?
So first, I'll go with my ranking. I definitely think I'm going to put this at number 7.
Okay, we have a top 10 state.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the first couple were taken. I think number 7 is a pretty good spot for this.
7's fair. I like that. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely want to check out Mardi Gras. The swamp tours would be awesome. I think that this being a state where our Gary, I should say.
Yes.
Where he flew home from after his journey. I think that'd be a really cool place to take our daughter at some point.
That would be very cool. For those who are listening, might not be 100% familiar. Our Gary, he took a trip from Ohio down to Louisiana. He took a
kayaking
kayak.
journey.
I want to say canoe. Took a kayaking journey all the way down the Ohio River to the Mississippi River, down to the Gulf. And the Gary now acts as though he's born and raised in Louisiana. He's got to do his
crawfish, crab boil every year.
Crab boil. Yeah, that's his tradition, which I appreciate. I get it. So,
which was a 66-day trip.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty
kayak,
cool experience for you guys to take Emmy down there someday.
I think
for
so
sure.
too. So I'm definitely going to put that number 7.
Okay.
I might regret not putting it a little bit higher, but I think 7's a good spot for all.
I think 7's a very solid spot. I would have to agree with you. Like I said, top. I would love to go to Louisiana someday, just to see the culture, the cuisine, the food, the experiences, the vibes. All in all, I think Louisiana would be very cool to see. So, with that being said, as we begin our departure from the state of Louisiana, as well as our conclusion of our 3-part series, concluding episode 29 of 50 States, 50 Murders. We want to continue to thank you, the listener, for tuning in Each and every week, we will continue covering a new state as well as a murder case that took place there.
If you've not already, please be sure to follow and subscribe. We're on Spotify, TikTok, and now on YouTube. Be sure to tune in next week for episode 30.